Halo 3 is often regarded as the peak of the Halo series and widely considered one of the best games ever made. Halo originated on the Xbox and was one of the main reasons that people decided to shelve over the $300 for the console. It redefined what a first-person shooter could do. It allowed for shooters to not only be accessible on a platform other than PC, but proved what the Xbox was truly capable of. Leading up to the inevitable release of Halo 3, there was a massive marketing push that used the tagline, "Finish the fight." This was supposed to be the epic conclusion to one of the biggest game series of all time. It did more than just deliver on the story front. With a fully fleshed out multiplayer mode that utilized the revolutionary Xbox Live to its fullest, Halo 3 took the world by storm. To this very day, Halo 3 remains the highest selling Halo game of all time. Is it really that surprising though? When someone says Xbox, more often than not, their mind jumps straight to Halo. The terms are synonymous with each other, and for good reason. Without Halo, I doubt Xbox would have even made it past their first generation. Nowadays, though, Halo is often brought up in a negative light. More specifically, 343 Industries and the downfall of Halo. The start of this change originated with the legendary Halo 3. The game utilized decent graphics, exquisite multiplayer, and a great campaign, albeit a little short. Following this, Bungie, the original developer of the Halo series, came out with Halo 3 ODST, an interesting spin-off with lots of value, and, one of my personal favorites, Halo Reach. After this, they wanted to move on to new games in the hopes of expanding their reach on the industry. Microsoft didn't have any of this and instead decided to build up their own in-house studio known as, you guessed it, 343. While most of the time a switch in developers for a game series is seen as disheartening to fans, it can be a welcome shift in design philosophy to bring new life in a series. Not in this case, though. Look, I'm not going to say that Halo 4 is inferior to Halo 3 or any other Halo game for that matter. It has a lot going for it. Insane graphics, and interesting plot, we'll say, and added gameplay mechanics. The latter of the bunch, though, is the issue. Up until 4, Halo had a very unique set of controls. It minimized the sprint aspect, minus reach, and differentiated itself from movement-heavy shooters by focusing on what the player interacted with, not how it interacted with it. So when the first game by 343 had such a drastic emphasis on sprinting, it set a few people off, me included. But I've been replaying the Halo campaigns, starting with Reach. Once I beat Halo 3, I never really knew what was in store for me, until now. It can be summed up with one word: atmosphere. Halo 3 positioned itself as this epic story where everything mattered, and that worked for it immensely. This is mainly due to three things: writing, graphics, and sound. When I said Halo 4 had some stellar graphics, I meant it. The game is, in my eye, the pinnacle of what a 360 is capable of, and yet it just doesn't fit. I'm not the first to complain about this, as many fans have stated that while it looks fantastic, it has a certain futuristic-esque style that just doesn't sit well with Halo. It reminds me of just yet another sci-fi shooter. Even the humans have that look, and that just doesn't work. Humans are supposed to be more reliant on stereotypical military designs, not futuristic ones. That's why it makes the game feel a little more generic than it should. That's a way bigger topic than today's video, but the gist of it is that Microsoft thought that if they made Halo like every other shooter, then they could appeal to those fan bases and in turn grow the IP. Instead, they ended up isolating the fans they did have and not appeal to new ones because those people already had access to one of those kind of games. I strongly recommend checking out the channel Favin, as he does some great videos on the subject, card on the top right. The graphics and sound go hand in hand. The visuals of the game were complemented by its sound design. The futuristic laser beam-like sounds are fine for any other sci-fi shooter, but not Halo. The orchestral magic of the original games were one of the reasons the games were so iconic in the first place. You take that away and you're left with generic-feeling music. That's the issue with Halo 4. It feels too generic. Writing is an aspect that both games got right to a certain extent. Halo 3 had better writing, no doubt, though some of that glory can be contributed to it already having a previous storyline that all it needed to do was just build off of. Halo 4 had to originate an entirely new story that was attuned to the ones of the earlier games. In a way, they succeeded, but in my mind, it lacked something. Halo 3's story worked because you knew what was going on. You knew the stakes of the battle. From the very start, Halo 3 just worked. It never tried too hard, it was just there. It had a story that made sense but wasn't overly simplified. What I'm getting at here is that Halo 3's story focused on major plot points. It was clear and distinguishable from the very start what your main goal was. Then it elaborated upon the said story through certain nuances, whether they were highly expressive character animations, detailed dialogue, or just the environment in general. Halo 3 is the shining example of how to tell a story. Halo 4, on the other hand, deviated from the formulaic approach immensely and not in a favorable way. It felt like it wanted to feel high stakes, and it really wasn't. It tried too hard to be something that it just couldn't be. Perhaps the best example of this is that of movies. Older 1950 to 70 movies have a different take on storytelling. It's more existential and has a nice way of profoundly getting the point across. Modern day movies have a different method of this. They focus more on continuous movement and plot development to keep the audience more continuously interested. With the older classics, it may take a good chunk of time before you're invested in the plot. Today, we see movies implementing a few of these tactics, but largely doing their own thing. Now, I'm not saying by any means that the movies were exclusively better decades ago. The ways movies are made should adapt as their audience does as well. Sometimes, though, you just find one that tries to adapt a story from 50 years ago in today's movie scene, and it just doesn't bode well. If Halo 3 is the original Journey to the Center of the Earth, then Halo 4 is the 2008 reimagining. Both have their merits, but one is better at being what it's supposed to be, not what it thinks it needs to be. The atmosphere of Halo 3 is grand, and it needs no introduction. You know what's at stake. The music, writing, and graphics portray this in a light that is perfect for what the game is. Halo 4 feels like it wants to be that, but just tries way too hard. However, that's mainly just the campaign. How does it fare in terms of online multiplayer? Decently. Part of me feels like 343 developed this game with multiplayer in mind first, and then thought of a way to create a campaign. It's still plagued by lots of new and previously mentioned issues, though. The majority of these include Forge, Sprint, and of course the sound of graphics. Forge for me is a touchy subject. I personally enjoyed it greatly. But when comparing it to 3's, it's a little hard to go back. The minimizing of a budget, exclusion of important parts, and weird restrictions just limit its potential. As with any Halo game, Forge is an important feature that, when lackluster, reduces loads of the replayability value. Halo 4's Forge will only ever be described as fine and nothing more. Sprinting, on the other hand, I found to be exclusively bad. When it was first introduced in Halo Reach, there wasn't that much of an emphasis on it, as it took up your character ability slot, and thus most of the time you weren't even able to sprint. It was a good balance between being able to run faster and limiting its use. Halo 4, however, allows you to always use it, in addition to having an empty character ability slot. Halo was leaning in this direction. It was a gradual process that most grew aware of with 4. Halo wasn't being Halo anymore. It was continuously becoming more and more mobile to follow trends. While it wasn't until Halo 5 blew the door open on this, the whole thing became a huge issue, 4 did raise a few eyebrows. In multiplayer especially, Sprint was a somewhat cheap way of escaping conflict. Some of the flaws in the map design became readily apparent given this new ability as well. All in all, Sprint was an addition that marked an ever-growing change with the series as a whole. Since I already touched on the graphics and sound in my talk about the game's campaign, I'll keep it brief. It didn't help the game at all. While it was much more of an issue with the story mode, it was still a problem here. The atmosphere of Halo 4's multiplayer was almost non-existent. It was unlike Halo 3's, as it just was another shooter. The generic nature of the game was heavily noticeable and bolstered by the online. Sure, some aspects of it were nice and enhanced the experience. For the most part, it wasn't a good Halo multiplayer. The distinction between a good game and a good Halo game is massive. Halo 4 was just that, a good game. Had it not been bearing the Halo cross and had a unique story of its own, I bet it would have been much better received by fans. It represented a change in the series. one that led to its eventual downfall. I will not tell anyone that Halo 4 is inferior to Halo 3 directly. But if I compared the two based on what it meant to be a Halo game, Halo 4 is undoubtedly the worst Halo game. In conclusion, Halo 4 falls under many of the tropes that shooters like it have, while still having enough of its own merits to justify it as a good game, but not at all a good Halo game.